We've just discussed sort of the state of the economy, state of the next 6 months, based on a lot of data that you've analyzed that is produced by the federal government. You know where I'm going here,
Right,
okay?
exactly.
Which
yeah, for
is,
sure. Yeah.
what happens? Walk me through your life with a BLS that does not produce monthly data.
Well, everyone's life, right? I mean,
Mhm.
think about if we don't have timely, accurate, comprehensive data on how the economy is performing, and the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, is key to that. They produce this consumer price index. We talked about that. They produce the
Yep.
jobs numbers. We talked about that. Businesses can make good decisions about investing, hiring, firing. The Federal Reserve can make good decisions about should I cut rates, not cut rates. None of us can, investors can't make good decisions about, the investment in stocks and bonds that's going to add to interest rates. There's a gazillion ways that we're all going to pay a price for that if we don't continue to have timely, accurate, and comprehensive data. And in the case of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, sure there's problems measuring things. There always is, and just given the scale and scope of what they're trying to do. But the
You must
answer is
factor that into the way you look at things. Like I had somebody tell me it takes 3 months to get 1 month of good data.
no.
Okay.
In typical times, that is absolutely not true. I mean, the revisions. So he's whatever that person is, whoever that is, they're focusing on the revisions to the data.
Right.
They're saying,
Right.
I have to wait for 3 months to get enough responses to get enough good information to publish it.
That by August, I'll have a good sense of what June looked like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 95% of the times, not so. The data, when you get the first month's worth of data, that's going to tell you exactly what you need to know going forward. There are times, though, when the economy turns, like now, when it's going from a good economy in 2024 to a tough economy in 2025 and a potentially recessionary economy in 2026. That's a turning point. When there are turning points, then the surveys become more complicated and the data becomes more murky, and the initial estimates that you get are less representative of the reality of what's going on because the economy's turning. It's going down.
Right.
But that's information. So the fact that we're getting these big downward revisions is actually a tell. That's another tell. You asked me what indicators would I look at? I'd look at that indicator.
That's a big indicator to you.
That's a huge indicator. If you're getting big downward revisions, that's a tell that the economy is sucking wind, and it may actually be in recession already, if history is any guide. So I don't buy into that whatsoever. And the answer to all of this isn't stop publishing because the one policy step I've heard is, well, we're not going to publish the data every month. We're going to publish it every 3 months, to your point that we don't but the answer to getting better data isn't doing that. The answer to the better data is fund the Bureau of Labor Statistics, give them the resources they need. In fact, here's another interesting point. Consumer Price Index, CPI. We're all focused on that like a laser beam because that tells us about inflation and what's going on with inflation. The Fed needs that information as quickly as it possibly can to make good decisions. Almost a third of the products that are canvassed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics to construct that measure, they send actual people out there to Trader Joe's. They get that packet of chicken and they say
to see that for themselves, just take that. Right. Yeah.
But because of the cuts to BLS payrolls, because of the Doge cuts, they can't send out as many people. And therefore now they're imputing, so-called imputing. That's a technical word for, coming up with making stuff up based on other data. It's certainly not as accurate, as good as a survey. And that compares to a third is now imputed. Before this, if you go back a year ago, it was 10%. So the answer is, please, give the BLS more people so they can do more surveys and they can get better data, and the result will be a more accurate, a more timely, more comprehensive set of data. That's the answer. That's the solution. But if you're not going to do that, certainly don't cut back on the timeliness of the data that we're receiving.
Look, if this gets so politically interfered with, where you don't have confidence, forget the politics of this a minute, your own politics, anybody's politics. You're at Moody's. Your job is to try to assess the state of the economy in different aspects. And if you can't get reliable data from the U.S. government, what's the alternative? How do you backfill that yourself? And is it realistic to create essentially a private BLS that the financial community could rely on?
Well, there's no way to replicate what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is doing in the private sector. That's a classic, what economists call public good, right? I mean, that's the benefit of that's going to be shared broadly by everyone in the economy, and it should be paid for by everyone. And there's just no way for a private sector entity or entities to find the economics viable to do what the BLS is doing. And by the way, it couldn't be done because there's all kinds of privacy issues and security issues. And if you're canvassing a major American corporation, how many people you ask them how many people do they employ? They're not going to tell another private sector how many people.
Private company,
employ.
yeah, right.
They're not going to do that.
They already distrust the government enough, and they
That's one of the reasons why the survey responses are down, because they already the lack of trust. So. But we're not standing still. Well, we're going to try hard here. So there's some data we have a better shot at coming up with estimates of what's going on than others, like the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. We have a shot at that, right? Because those are prices that are out there in the public domain. Amazon posts them, Walmart posts them.
In theory, you could put together something that would give us a fairly accurate,
and in the past, some have, like Harvard, Cavallo, Billion Pieces Project. He did this because of Argentina. Argentina obviously made up a lot of data back in the day because they were hiding their inflationary problem. And so as a way to figure out what was actually going on, he constructed this Billion Pieces Project to canvass Argentinian businesses to get a better read on what the inflation actually was. And it worked for him. And so we'll do that, for CPI. But for jobs, that's a lot harder. Now, we'll rely on other sources. In the case of jobs, we have ADP. That's the human resource company. And I used to construct that data for them. And it is a very large sample of companies. It's not as representative because
it's about half of corporate America, right? There's two big firms that do this, right? ADP, I feel like there's a competitor.
There's no, ADP is the largest, I think, by far.
Yeah, they're the largest one. And
there's others that are kind of smaller.
Got it.
But the problem with ADP, though, if you're using payroll processing services, which is how they get the data, you've got to be a pretty good sized company. A small company is going to do their own payroll. They're not going to hire. So you're missing all that stuff that's going on. So it's not exactly right, but it gives you a window into what's going on. But here's the other point. It's not like people aren't going to make inferences about what's going on in the economy and inflation if they don't get the data from the BLS. They're going to continue to do it. Right. This is going to do it based on bad data, worse data, right?
Well, let me ask you this. There's bad data out there internationally. Like I had an economist tell me, who's very worried about, if the Fed essentially gets merged with the Oval Office, right? I'm being a little dramatic, but that we've seen a version of this. It's called Turkey, and that the data you get out of Turkey is highly unreliable. Is that are there examples like that where maybe we could say, hey, be careful here, U.S. Congress, be careful here, government entities. You don't want to end up like a country X here where their economic data is just not believable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Turkey's a good example. I mentioned Argentina. Of course, China is the poster child, right? For their data. The quality of their data. And private sources have figured out different ways to kind of measure what's going on. They have satellites that look them out, how much light is emanating from Shanghai. That'll give you a sense of GDP. That's what we're going to be reduced to.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an issue. But having said all that, Chuck, look, I think the BLS has been around since 1883, right? And it's a highly professional organization with lots of checks and balances. It's going to be pretty tough to monkey with that, at least quickly. I mean, maybe over time. And maybe there's some things you can put your finger on the scale here or there. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. It's possible. But I don't feel at this point, we'll have to see what happens here, exactly what changes actually occur, if any. But at this point, I think it's still run in a very professional way. The BLS, the BEA, the census, the other major government statistical agencies. So I think we're not. Turkey it's premature to start going down that path. I think we're a long way from that. But we should keep our eyes on this. It's very, very important to understand what's going on.